welcome everybody. I can't see everybody now because I know in gallery mode, but is there anybody who hasn't seen me talk before, doesn't know who, my story in any way, shape or form? Just put your hand up. Okay, there's a couple, lovely. So I'm just going to briefly tell you about my story in a nutshell, and then we'll get straight onto the slides. And I would say to anybody, have a pen and paper handy. I'm going to share with you some things that you might go, oh, I didn't know about that, because there was things I didn't know. So do go find a bit of paper and a pen, because you might find something useful that you want to check out afterwards, but which you learn on the job, as you know, as we are with carers. And so for me, my caring role really started just over 20 years ago when I first came to London. I met Neil. He was our print supplier where I was working as a graphic designer, and within 6 weeks of us going out, he fell ill with a malignant brain tumour. I said to him, just get better, I'm here for you, not realising what that would mean for me as a carer. As you know, you think, just get well, or I'm here for you, not realising what that's going to do and how that's going to impact your own life. And then fast forward to that, and you might be experiencing some of this at the moment. Neil has had a stroke. He's in a hospital bed in our living room, unable to speak, within a peg feeding tube, and he was more like a body in a bed. It was dreadful. It was a tragedy for both of us, as it is for you, because although Neil had the brain tumor, I woke up to brain cancer for 13 years. May not have been in my head, but it certainly impacted every area of my life, which you may be finding as well. It's like one carer said to me, it's like living an invalid's life, because you're having to go only as fast as your loved one can. You're always thinking about them, aren't you? And I found as well, for me, my world was then a smaller place. I felt a bit isolated and alone. I felt ill from the stress and the burden of caring. And if I did get out, I felt guilty, that awful guilt, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But you need to get out and see your friends. It's crucial. No man is an island. And I was being judged at times. Maybe you've had flippant comments mentioned. So all these things were playing out. It is such a complex thing. So I take my hat off to you. Not everybody can be a carer. It's very hard, and you're having to deal with so much. So I just want to share with you, really, this is in the latest stage of Neil's life, of course. So about that, preparing for as and when the inevitable may happen and your caring role comes to an end. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. Share screen. Here we go. Okay. And Mike is kindly going to read out from the chat. So please do engage. There we go. Lovely. So preparing for life after caring. And there's lots of things you can do beforehand. And as I said, have a pen and paper handy. And as we go through. So firstly, the first thing I want to share, and this is in the last summer of Neil's life, unbeknown to me, of course, I didn't know. Now, how I approached that touchy subject. Oh, now, what was that touchy subject? For me, I think there could be a number of touchy subjects. For me personally, it was talking to Neil about his funeral plans. And, at that time, this was before he was in the hospital bed, unable to speak. I didn't know what Neil might like or want, and I didn't know how quickly the disease might take hold. So I had no idea. But I didn't really know how to approach it with him without saying, you're ill, let's talk about your funeral plans. Nobody wants to hear that kind of conversation. That sounds awful. So it was kind of weird. I was at the carer centre here locally in Richmond, and I'd been to some meditation classes, and there was lots of peaceful and beautiful music. We were doing a number of set pieces, and we got chatting, and we were all saying, well, what do you like? And then we started to talk about, well, what would you have for your funeral? What would you like everybody to listen to, for your gathering? And I remember saying, I'd like Green Day's Time of Your Life, which is an acoustic set, which is, he says, I hope you had the time of your life. And that gave me an idea. So when I came home, there was Neil sat on the sofa. I came and joined him, had a cuppa. And I said, you know what, Neil? we were chatting, and I said, my piece of music would be, for my funeral anyway, would be Green Day's Time of Your Life. I said, you know, what do you like? What do you think about? And in me saying that in that kind of way, and you could say it for a number of things like that, the onus was then on me, not on him. So I was talking about me and what I would like. And it kind of then opened that space for Neil to then start to talk about what he might like. And then bang, it happened thick and fast. He suddenly opened, and within 30 seconds, he told me a number of things. He said, you know, he'd like when the Saints go marching in because he loves Saints Football Club, Southampton. I thought, oh, that's a good one, Neil, perfect. He said, you know, he'd like to have it all down in Taunton, cremated, because that's where most of his friends and family are, which are not here, up in London. Good to know, didn't think about that one. And then he said, oh, I'd like you and my best friend Steve to speak at it. I went, eh? I just wasn't expecting that at all, which quite funny, because I wasn't expecting him to say that at all. But it was interesting. And that was the way I approached that subject, in putting the onus on yourself, whatever the subject, it might be something else. It can be quite useful to help them kind of engage and then allow them to open. But, you know, sometimes people might not want to open up, or they might not be wanting to talk about it. I did try this. I'm going to be honest with you. My mum is fit and healthy, but I did try it on her a few years, and she was particularly frosty with me. So it doesn't work on everybody. But it's a way to approach that. And we have to respect their wishes. So I'm just going to share this slide, and then I'll come and see if there's anything in the chat. So take the onus off them and onto yourself, allowing them for space to talk. You know, what kind of funeral could it be? And what would they want? You know, there's all sorts these days, isn't there? And even with the casket, things like that. My next door neighbour, sadly, she passed a couple of years ago, and she was only in her 50s, very sad. But instead of the usual, she was in a cardboard casket, which was printed with beautiful flowers all over it. There's a whole range of things. You know, any particular music or hymns. We had Jerusalem for Neil because he was a big rugby fan, or readings and poetry. It's kind of, you know, that whole, for all these things that you can think of, which, you know, they would like to choose if they feel like they would want to go there, depending on who you're caring for. But of course, we might not be able to get it out of them, you know, that information, or if they don't want to talk about it, we just have to respect their wishes. And Michael, is there anybody in the chat, anything come up yet? I don't think there is there?
Not yet, Sarah, no.
Lovely. Okay, so that was just one thing I wanted to share with you. So that was locked into my mind. And then secondly, getting that paperwork into place. I know with a lot of us, there's been a lot of paperwork already when you're being a carer, filling in, form filling, social services, etc. But here's some interesting ones. There's one or two that I didn't know about as well. This is, I've shared before, lasting power of attorney, LPA, or power of attorney. It's a long fangled form, don't get me wrong. You've got two sections. You've got either you can do the health and welfare form or the property and financial affairs. For me personally, I was close enough to Neil. I kind of know about his health and welfare. I knew what he wanted and how things to go. So that was great. But I did need the financial, and, you know, it took a whole weight off my shoulders because there were things that came up with the banks, etc., that it was unforeseen, and I had that in place so that I could deal with that and close a particular account where they were starting to put charges on. Neil was never going to be able to go in and close an account. I said to them, you know, it's over, but I could give that to them. And it can be costly if you get a solicitor to do it. But what I did was I printed it out at home and I filled it in at home as much as possible. And then I just asked the solicitor to look through it for me. Cheeky, I know, but you can kind of do it like that, which is quite handy. Or thinking about your carers centre, they often are, you know, offer these kind of financial gatherings where solicitors come in. You can fill it in and then have a word with one of them and get them to check it over before you post it off. So that was really useful. And actually DNR, or do not resuscitate. You can talk to your doctor. Neil wanted this years before, when he was up and about walking around, and he said he wanted to be a DNR. He didn't want to be, you know, revived by paramedics if suddenly something happened, and fully understood that. Didn't really have that in place until later on when he was actually in that hospital bed. I then went and spoke to my doctor because I really didn't want paramedics to start messing about with him when he was so very poorly and kind of at death, you know, 1 foot in the grave already with him. I didn't want them to start messing about with him at all. I wanted him to go in peace, and that's exactly how that went. So have a think about that one. And then where there's a will, there's a way. And having a will in place, of course, it takes pressure off as well, knowing what they want. But also there's something called a living will. I didn't know about this until it came up and somebody from the hospice mentioned it to me. We didn't have one in place, but it's kind of things like, if they want to refuse treatment later on, for all various reasons of how they want end of life to go. So there is a living will if you want to look into that further. And of course, in putting these things in place, relieve you of unwanted stress later on and helps to give peace of mind. And I can see there's a few chats if you want to read them out, Michael.
Yes, yeah, maybe if there's quite a few come in, so maybe if I just read 2 or 3 at a time and you can respond to those. So Dorothy said that she's already written the plan for her own funeral. Julia says it's also possible not to have a funeral.
Yes.
And they're arranging for a joint bench seat in their favourite local park.
That's beautiful. Beautiful, Julia. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, I heard about that on Jeremy Vine on Radio 2 yesterday. They were sharing where some people, they say, I don't want the waste of money. I don't really want that. And they just cremated kind of as and when. There isn't that gathering. And there was fors and againsts on that. Some people felt they didn't have closure. Actually, family didn't have closure. But obviously it's down to the individual. So that's very interesting. There are a whole load of ways of how you can have things go. It's interesting to look into those now. And like, you know, it could be, you could have a gathering in a woodland, for example, a kind of more natural setting instead. Any more there, Michael?
Yes, quite a few more. So so Linda says that her late wife wrote down exactly what she wanted, and she was so grateful after her death, and no one could argue with anything that was in it. Alan says he had always look on the bright side. Oh, sorry, Kathy says for her husband Alan that they had always look on the bright side of life with a visual tribute showing on the screen.
Excellent.
And Julia says, I wish I hadn't handed over the whole power of attorney to the solicitor. We got stung over the price.
It's a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, she's asking a question as well. Is a living will the same as an advance statement?
I don't know about an advance statement. Julia, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Do you know, Michael?
I don't, but I'll make a note to ask our helpline. Yeah, I've not heard of that either. So
bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, great. Celia says, Dad's death hit us suddenly, so we had to learn as we went along. So much to do after someone passes away. More prepared for Mum's death, she would not plan her funeral, as it had to be planned in advance based on her favourite hymns and prayers, etc. Yes,
yeah, that's it. And sometimes you could just say to them, what's your favourite bits of music? You don't have to mention the funeral word. You could just say, well, you know, just start to reel off your favourite music and see what kind of music they like. You know, just even that is quite a beautiful thing. You start to glean what they, you know, what's deep down, the things that they keep thinking about, and what through the years what they've enjoyed.
And then the final comment for now from Dorothy, which I didn't know this actually. Dorothy says, if someone is on benefits, they don't have to pay for power of attorney.
Really?
Yeah.
That's annoying. I didn't know that. Don't need to pay.
Oh, and Chloe has responded to say a living will is the same as an advance statement.
Thank you, Chloe. That's good to know. I'll Amend your slide. Great, thank you.
So just one more, Sarah. M. Josephs has said, just to advise folk here, I chose for my late sister and my dad each a direct cremation. With these, no mourners are present. Not everyone's cup of tea, but the first cost 900, the second was 999. It suited me.
Direct cremation, that's what it's called. Thank you. Thank you. Like I say, I only just heard about those yesterday. So it's interesting to know then what is available, because what you don't know, do you? So it's useful for us all. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Was there any more that you want to share, Michael?
I think Patricia says it can also be called an advance directive. So that's the advance statement. I think it can also be. Anyway, well, I'll ask about that after the session, and we can include that in the follow-up email, any information on advance statements or advance directives.
That's really useful, and it can be very useful for people so they know what to put in place, and it's all laid out so everybody knows everybody's on the same page. That's brilliant. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to move on to Daniela's story. And Daniela was a fellow carer with me, going to the carers centre, and at the time we were doing the relaxation sessions each week for about 6 weeks. And Daniela cared for her mother for many years, and she was kind of on her own. She didn't seem to be anybody else. She didn't have any other siblings, so it was just her and her mum, and she cared for her for a number of years. And I would say Daniela was probably, I think she was a bit more, she was only a few years older than me, but because I felt caring had really taken its toll on her. Her hair was quite grey and kind of frizzy. She looked older for her years, and she had quite a sallow complexion. She complained a lot as well. I remember that as well. She kind of focused on a lot of the negatives, and I don't think that helped her either. Hey, believe me, I know that I talked about the negatives as well. Don't worry about that. But I just noticed that with Daniela. Anyway, sadly, late one spring, it was her mother finally passed away, and I met up with Daniela to see how she was, and we met at actually Petersham Nurseries in the Glass House for a cuppa here in Richmond to see how she was, and she was telling me all about it and how she was feeling. And with all that, she said what I noticed with her, because she hadn't focused on friends, and friends can fall to the wayside. It's easy for all of us to do that when you're caring, when you're busy. She seemed quite alone with very little money to show for it. I know caring can be very expensive, and I know it's hard financially for a lot of us. And she, at the end of all these years of caring, she seemed to have very little for herself after giving so much for caring. And now she was thinking about just moving away. And this was huge alarm bells for me. It all seemed really sad when I thought, well, what about, her life? She should be now enjoying or sitting back and just reflecting and having some good quality time for her, is kind of how I felt. And also, as well as Daniela, I've got a few friends that I talk about when I give my longer discussion, sharing of my story. After Neela passed, also, I know a number of friends where they ended up long-term sick almost immediately after they'd finished their caring role. Now they were dealing with their illness. And I thought, that again was huge alarm bells for all of us. It's about, making sure that we are okay, making sure you are okay. Whatever it takes, you are number one in your life. It all pivots from you. So make sure you are okay. Not easy to do. So it's creating that balance. And so, you want life at the end of your caring role, and you want time for you, don't you? It's really important. And is that, what do we have to look forward? So make sure that that is not you at the end of that caring role, as I found with Daniela and a few of others. And it's about investing in yourself. And I ended up with new friends. I don't know about you guys, but also for me, I made good friends with some carers and still have them as good friends years later, because carers understand, of course. And I make the effort. I cultivate new friends. So if there's anybody, say for example for you at the moment, if you'll go to care for a couple, or there's somebody you get on with really well at your local carer centre, why don't you say, you know, how about we swap numbers? Do you fancy meeting for a cuppa in the week or something? And, you know, cultivate those new friends, because they may prove invaluable. And, you know, that's helping us to find a way to keep some of your own life intact, and will help to bode well for the future. So investing in yourself, I'll just share this slide and then we'll go to the chat. So keep in contact with good friends, the good ones that is, and loved ones, those who are your best support network, those who fill you up, you know, when you're feeling down, making sure that you give them a call. And I know friends may drift. I've had it as well, where they just don't call. And sometimes then it's about us then putting the effort in and ringing them sometimes, or shooting them a quick text and say, hey, how are you doing? You know, don't know what they might be going through at present, and nurturing those friendships, the old and the new. I know at times, sometimes, like I say, I got quite angry and upset with some friends who just never rang, or we never saw again. And some I actually let go. In the end, I actually felt better of just going, they're just not going to come. I call it a day. And put the feelers out, touch base, you know, text to touch base, or call and make plans. You know, make a plan just to meet somebody for a quick cuppa, have something to look forward to. And also, if you are of working age, you know, previous work colleagues or connections, maybe just text or email them to connect. Just ask how they are on the off chance, just so that you are keeping in their peripheral vision in case the time arises when you are actively looking for work. I did that one as well, because you just never know. And even if they can't help, they might know somebody else who can. Michael, do you want to share for the chat?
Nothing more on this topic. There was a couple of other comments about lasting power of attorney, but nothing as yet on investing in yourself.
Super, thank you. So yes, it's really important to invest in yourself. Sometimes you don't feel like it, and when you're feeling low, you don't really feel like picking up the phone, but sometimes that's the time to do it. Or just shoot a text to a good friend and say, do you know what, I'm feeling a bit low, you know, are you free for a chat? You know, they'd want to know. My friends would want to know, and I'm sure yours would too. So connections can make a real difference to the quality of your life, and they really do. And I think you know that too. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, this is a chapter in my book, How Much Longer? And, you know, maybe if you're kind of veering at the end, you know, for me, when Neil was in that hospital bed, when he came home after having that stroke, I thought, you know, maybe a month at the most that he would be there. 4 more years. 4 years when, you know, doctors had given up on him and presumed that he would be gone within a week or two. We just never know. And when you're putting a lot of love and time into somebody, it actually does create longevity, and it really does. And, you know, the question I was asking myself at that time was, God, how much longer? How much longer am I going to keep doing this? And am I going to have any life left at the end of all this? And maybe you've been asking that question as well. And it's not a bad reflection on you, though we can feel guilty asking this question, can't we? Also, we know that if your caring role has come to an end, it means that probably that your loved one has passed. And these thoughts can be conflicting and unsettling. And also, what makes caring so hard as well, we can often be grieving long before they actually pass. You're kind of grieving for the life that they've lost and how things were for each other. I couldn't go out and socialize with Neil like we used to, you know, that was all gone. That's what makes it so very hard. And knowing that impending loss is inevitably going to happen. And so with that, what I would like to do is just share one paragraph from my book on this subject of how much longer. And here we go. So, as much as I loved my husband, my life was happening there and then as he deteriorated. I became absorbed by his illness, neglecting my own needs. He was my world, and my perspective on life narrowed. As his world became smaller, so did mine. I felt myself emotionally holding tighter onto him, but I was slowly sank with him. And I remember crying on his shoulder one day as he was slumped in his wheelchair. It was unhealthy for both of us. And I can't even imagine what he was thinking. My health suffered as a consequence. It was then that I realized I needed to allow space between caring for Neil and caring for my own needs. Although we were very close, we were still two separate beings. As hard as it is to imagine losing a loved one, we are all born and we all die at different times. Neil's time would probably come sooner than mine, and I had to accept that. I needed to create space for my own life so that I could be there for both of us for however much longer it would be. So there we go. We want to make the most of our time with our loved one, but we need to strike that balance between our own life and caring for our loved ones. And we can't predict the future. So making the right choices now for both of you will help keep you well and make the most of these days as much as you can as possible. So it's quite an interesting passage there of, not holding on so tightly. I certainly found myself doing that. It's interesting, when I went on the silent retreat that I mentioned before, I went to try and loosen my grip on Neil, but that's not what came up actually. It's really interesting when you go on one of these silent retreats, other things come up, which are kind of blindside you. Very interesting, but it did help me to loosen my grip, but it can sometimes be very tricky. So focusing on the now. All we have is today. All we have is this present. So what can you do today to nurture your friendships? Who have you not spoken to for a while? Who do you really enjoy hanging out with? And also, if you may be looking for work after your caring role comes to an end, do you have previous work colleagues or connections that you could get in touch with? Like I say, just shoot them a text or a quick email. That's a great thing about emails, isn't it? You can just send off a couple of lines, say, hey, I was just thinking about you the other day. How's it all going? That's all you need to put, but it just kind of gets you in there and they kind of, oh yeah, can put, even if you're not spoken to them for a year or two even. And as and when you're not caring anymore, what would your plans be? And that'd be great if you put in the chat, if you've finished, I know some of you have stopped caring now, or you're not caring anymore and your roles come to an end. But what would you enjoy doing? What would you like to do if you're not caring? But with all that's happening and how much longer with when it's end of life as well, it can be overwhelming. So do confide in others. Don't suffer, behind closed doors on your own. And maybe look at counselling sessions. I had counselling sessions. I thought, really, they're really going to work? Actually, they did for me. The local carer centre offered counselling, really good. I just went for one session first to see if I liked it, and they were really good. And also through your GP, they offer counselling sessions as well. And it will be a number of charities that offer that. And I'll be talking about that a bit more later, actually, about those. Okay. So preparing for whenever that day comes, of course, when your loved one may pass, for example. And for me, it was that last summer. I've been caring for Neil for 13 years. And Neil would go to a hospice day centre once a week on a Thursday, give me time out, and they would check him over. So it was perfect for both of us. And it was a summer, it was the August. And while he was at the day centre, I went for a bit of lunch with Nadia, my neighbour next door, and we were sat out in the sunshine. It was like, it's almost like a relief, sitting in the warm sunshine, having a glass of wine. For a couple of hours, I just felt a bit better. I felt a bit run down. And then I got a phone call from Julia, the head nurse at the hospice. And when I answered it, she said, Sarah, have you noticed Neil's worsened? He doesn't look so good. And I kind of chuckled and I said, well, you know what? He's not looked good for a long time. he kind of looks the same to me. She said, well, I can see a change. And it actually surprised me. And I think the reason being, when I see Neil every day, I just thought he was the same, but she'd clearly seen, because she's not seen him probably for a week or maybe 2 weeks. She could clearly see that shift, which was quite interesting, but it shocked me. She said, I'm going to send him home with morphine, just in case, for over the weekend. Just in case. It really, really did surprise me. Anyway, that kind of blew out all the wind out of my sails. I came home. Neil was home a bit later, and I had a good old look at him. He still looked the same to me, because I see him all the time. And there was the morphine, and I had no idea what I was going to do with that. So it kind of left me in a quandary. And because she'd said that, I was then expecting the worst to happen at any moment. And it sent me into a tailspin. I didn't feel good. I felt quite upset. And with that, I was low. I felt very low for those next couple of weeks. But then he actually started to get better, and he visibly was better. And I thought, oh, he wants me to speak at his funeral. So what I decided, I was going to write his eulogy there and then, now that I felt better and he was better. Because as and when that time comes, I've got no idea how I'm going to be. And we, of course, as some of you said, we have a lot to deal with at the end. So I sat down in a better space and a better state of mind. And I wanted to make sure that he, the sense of the man, I wanted the comedy to come out, and all the things, the funny stories of Neil, I didn't want that doom and gloom. So that is when I put pen to paper and I wrote his eulogy. And it was interesting. One thing that I noticed, if you ever think about wanting to get up and speak at a funeral, not all of us do. And of course, don't go putting any pressure on yourself, because you're going through so much anyway. But what I found was, at home, if I spoke it aloud, I would cry. But then when I spoke it again straight after, I didn't cry. It was really interesting. That first time that I read it out loud, the emotions came out. But then as I wiped the tears away and I said it again, I was fine. So that was a great technique for me. So when I did get down to Taunton to finally read it out, I did it in the hotel bedroom in front of a couple of my mates, had a couple of tears, and then I was ready. And it then enabled me to say it out loud without being tearful, without crying, so I could get those words out, because it was so important to me. Anyway, Neil obviously was still in that hospital bed. I'd written the eulogy, and I kind of was looking at him, and I thought, you know what, one day I thought, I'm going to read Anita Morjani's chapter on how she had this huge near-death experience, because Neil was an atheist, and I felt like he was really holding on, because afraid of death, afraid of dying. And with Anita, she had end-stage cancer. She'd had cancer for 4 years, ended up in a coma, and then while she was in this coma, unbeknown to everybody else, she found herself outside her body. This is how she kind of saw everything, and she felt all this unconditional love. So I was sharing this while I was wedged into Neil's bed with him one evening, sharing this chapter with him. And she felt great. Pain, the grief, everything was gone. And she could see everything happening simultaneously. She could see her brother in another country desperately trying to get another flight back, because he'd been told she could be gone at any time, because she was in Hong Kong. And she could even see what was going down at the corridor with the doctor, speaking to her mother. She relayed all of this, because she could see and hear everything that was happening. Anyway, her father, who had died a few years before, was there, and he was present with her, and he said, it's not your time yet. And she said, well, I don't want to go back and live like that. It's been awful, because she was just a bag of bones in this hospital bed. But she chose to come back, and with that, and woke up. And within something like 5 weeks, all the tumors had drastically disappeared. And she was fine. And now she gives talks all around the world. So I shared that with Neil. And I said to him, did you enjoy that, Neil? And he put his thumb up so quickly, within 0.2 seconds, the only way he could actually communicate with me, which was absolutely wonderful. I'm just going to share this this is great for all of us, whether you believe in near-death experiences, etc., and her experience. But it's about self-care and self-love. And one of the biggest lessons I learned, says Anita, from nearly dying of cancer is the importance of loving myself unconditionally. In fact, learning to love and accept myself unconditionally is what healed me and brought me back from the brink of death. And that's quite beautiful. And I think that's one for all of us carers as well. Loving yourself, being really kind to yourself. And with that, in reading that, it wasn't that long that Neil actually, only 5 days later, he was gone. In me reading that to him, it was almost like it gave him permission to go. It allowed him to let go. And he was gone straight after. We went to Twickenham Stadium to watch England play Ireland in the rugby. That was his last day. And he had a taste of Bollinger as well. So that's not a bad day, is it? And when Neil passed, he was in my arms. I actually said, thank you. I said, thank you for Neil in my life. I really love Neil. But I said, thank you for his passing, because I just didn't want him suffering anymore. And compassion means to suffer with, which we certainly do, don't we, as carers? Michael.
Yes, we have had a few comments in the chat, Sarah, while you've been talking. So Julia's made a couple of suggestions. So she's saying, making an appointment with your GP to make sure you as the carer are fully resourced for your physical and mental well-being. Also suggested getting in touch with your local hospice to get pre-bereavement support.
Oh, no.
And then also on your point, Sarah, about not noticing when Neil's condition had deteriorated, and she was saying she's found taking regular photos of your loved one might help to identify if a transition has taken place.
Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. I didn't even think about that. You kind of think you would know. I also remember when Neil started to get a full head of hair again. When somebody's having chemotherapy, obviously a lot of people lose their hair. And I've been told, well, rub aloe vera gel, just natural aloe vera gel, into your scalp at night as you go to bed. And Neil did that, and because it was coming back in increments, didn't see it. And then on the kind of Friday, he came down the stairs and walked into the living room. And I remember he went, look at my hair, which I thought was quite funny. We went, oh yeah, your hair's back. But because it came in increments, we just didn't notice it. He had been bald, I think, like week or two before. Suddenly he'd had this full head of hair. And aloe vera gel is a good one there. A little tip, and it's cheap as well. And it's just putting nutrients back into your scalp.
Right, and a few about eulogies, Sarah. So Dorothy says that she isn't having a eulogy. Celia says she wrote her mum's eulogy a few weeks before she passed away, as she knew she'd feel too stressed when the time came, but was unable to rewrite it to get it just right when the time came. But
good for you. Yeah, it takes that pressure off, isn't it? If you kind of think, oh God, I've only got like 2 days left or whatever, that's horrible. You want that space kind of to be creative, so you can sit back and think, or go. And actually, if you could maybe go for a walk, I use my notes on my phone. So if I'm thinking of something, if you've got a piece of paper and you're staring at a desk, it can be a little bit constrictive. If you go for a walk thinking about them, and through the years, actually sometimes it comes much more naturally, much more easily.
Right, and Julius also just on eulogies as well. So she found writing her mother and father's eulogy incredibly comforting and empowering, and also choosing a selection of music for their funeral was wonderfully cathartic and helps her even now maintain her relationship with them.
That's beautiful, Julia. Thank you for sharing. That's really lovely. So yeah, so for me, as soon as Neil passed, I remember just going to the toilet, and it was all just quite bizarre how it suddenly all happened. And I kind of heard the words, move slowly, move slowly. And as a carer, we go through so much mentally, emotionally, and physically. And, you know, caring wrecked me a number of times. I'm sure maybe at times for you. But I got home and, you know, straight to bed to rest and recoup immediately. But what I felt that particular week, as soon as Neil had passed, I felt like I could sit down. And I don't mean just as physically sitting down, because yeah, you've got a lot to do, death certificate, etc. You've got all these things that you need to start to get that ball moving. But not just that, I could sit down emotionally and mentally. You're always on call, aren't you, as a carer? I mean, I don't know about you, but even if you've managed to get out, or you're doing something and you've maybe got a paid carer for your loved one, you're still on call just in case. And I was as well, because it's all encompassing. And, you know, what I would describe also, as soon as Neil had passed, I would describe it as like spending like long years in this long dark tunnel of caring, to suddenly be kind of spat out into the bright light, and suddenly within a second he's gone. I kind of almost had to pinch myself. I was really quite shocked, you know, even though it was expected. Luckily I had my mum with me at that time, so, and it was sunny, so I was able to just sit in the garden and just take stock of all that was happening. And so firstly, after they've gone, I remember I was having to ring like the paid carers like the following morning immediately. I had to ring them and say, don't come in, he's gone. And they were really surprised. They'd been there with him in the day before. They were really surprised. And then, of course, it's ringing friends and family, starting to let people know. And I was doing it in blocks. Don't feel like you have to do everything all in one go. You will just wear yourself thin. Take regular breaks, pace yourself. You know, there's things that you'll start to understand as you go through, as some of you're aware already, registering the death and the death certificate. And I made sure I had a number of copies of the death certificate, which was proved useful actually, because I was sending it off in the post to a number of places. Then you're not having to wait for it to come back and then send it off again. So you can get things done as quickly as possible. So get yourself a number of copies as and when. Actually, there's with the funeral arrangements, you know, ask for help, ask for support from friends and family if they're rallying. Help, you know, delegate certain things if you can. And of course, informing the services that you use, let them know as soon as possible, your GP, etc. Maybe start to jot down a list of things of what you need to do so that you can hit the ground running after that, so that you can start to tick them off your list. And bereavement benefit. I don't know about you, but I didn't even know this existed until suddenly somebody mentioned it to me after Neil had died. I didn't even know it existed. Bereavement benefit is, you know, you get a little bit of money as well. So I thought that was really useful to know. But like I say, as and when it happens, don't wear yourself thin. Take your time. And say, for example, just go and get into bed and just have a rest before you have to do anything else. Take your time over everything, and be very, very kind to yourself. Is there some more in the chat there, Michael?
Yes, there is, Sarah. So I think I don't know if you're going to be coming on to this, but thinking about returning to work, Joseph saying returning to the work arena after caring is an interesting one. Many are in a caring role for many years, as with yourself, Sarah, and subsequently have not had a normal job for a long time. Many people are not far off pension age by the time their role comes to an end, or perhaps they already are of pension age. So realistic work opportunities are usually a rarity. Also says nowadays universal credit recipients now receive SMSs to log into their online account and read a message. Often it's a bulk message advertising training in sectors such as construction, and apprenticeships are not only for young people. So, and says that they see no return to work scheme for former carers. And it's been interesting. This has been in the news actually the last week or two. I think Jeremy Hunt's been calling for more over 50s to go back to work or contribute, but I think people have been responding saying it's not as easy as that, with, you know, opportunities for People, 50 and above are not easy to come by often, especially if you've not been in work for quite a long time.
No, it is tricky. I know some of my friends as well. It's a really hard one, and also sometimes your confidence has gone a bit, your self-esteem, if you've been caring behind closed doors for years. It's a really tricky one. I don't know if carers, local carer centres offer these particular courses or lessons on this, of things that to get yourself round that, so that you start to kind of focus and process, so that we can start to apply for those jobs and see where it takes us. And those knockbacks, it's like, it's hard, isn't it, to keep, like you say, after being maybe years in full-time caring.
Which does give me an opportunity just to mention we will be running another series of sessions of Rediscover You that we've held in the last couple of years, where beginning in mid-June, and that's particularly for anyone who is looking to get back into work after a period of caring, whether that's alongside your caring, if you're able to work part-time, or if your caring has come to an end, and particularly exploring, if your confidence has taken a knock while you've been caring, and also to explore the different skills that you have from previous work and volunteering experience, and also skills that you've developed while you've been caring as well. So we'll be putting that up on the website in the coming weeks.
That's wonderful. That sounds really beneficial, Michael. I love the sound of that. I could have done a bit of that, actually, I think, as and when Neil passed away as well. Thank you. That sounds quite exciting, actually, rediscovering you. So very needed. But anyway, as and when your loved one goes, take it slowly. And it is take time out to come back to you again. So it is about rediscovering you again, so it's so very important. Now, I'm just going to talk briefly about Neil's funeral. Actually, before that, yes, I thought I was okay, but I actually hit a wall. I would say 2 months after Neil's funeral. I thought I was coping again. I thought I was soldiering on, getting on with some freelance graphic design. I was getting on with that, but I kind of ignored myself, and it really caught me out. We need to really allow space and time for ourselves as and when our loved one and our caring role has come to an end. I think of another friend, a volunteer who was at INS Stewart. As soon as his wife had died, after many years of caring for her, he was like, I want to create this kind of paid carers business for, focusing on those with neurological conditions. Great idea. But he kind of wanted to do it immediately. And I went, dude, you need to make sure you just take some time out for yourself. You've just been through a huge whole load of awful things. Just take some space. And then he hit a wall as well. And, so there's some alarm bells there. If you're still in the process of caring for your loved one, give yourself a few months of kind of just allowing the dust to settle, tuning into your body. And I'll be talking about that again in a minute.
Sarah, just in relation to that as well, Dorothy says, when caring ends, you are prone to getting ill, as you've been running on adrenaline for a long time. So.
Absolutely, you are. So take stock. And like I say, a number of people that I know fell very poorly afterwards. So do whatever it is you need to do to get back to you. Go to a retreat, take time out, write a list of things to look forward to, and people you want to hang out with, and just walking in nature, maybe certain places you want to go and see. Really, really important. And I'd say on a celebration of life is what I would describe Neil's funeral, because there'd been so much gloom and how he'd been ill for so very long. That's how I saw his funeral. And Neil's favourite colour was blue, so I ended up getting them to wear, please wear blue, royal blue if you can. That would be lovely. It kind of brightened up instead of us all just wearing black. I had a trumpeter, for example, playing when the Saints go marching in, so that was really cool. And I put a lot of photos up of Neil, so 3 or 4 big boards with lots of photos of him through the years before he kind of was, really poorly. and friends had flown in, and it really was a gathering of all his friends and family together, and that would never happen again. It must have been about 180 of us. And it was the love that was shared, the stories of Neil and how he'd touch everyone. At the end of the day, it was all about love. That's really kind of all we leave at the end of the day, is that love, which was quite beautiful. So after they've gone, friends and family may rally at the beginning, but this can tail off, even if you're struggling and you're feeling very low after all that's happened. I remember that for me particularly as well. Don't suffer in silence, ask for help. And bereavement counselling is out there for us, though, from your GP, carer centre, could be from a policy. They sometimes have them. I used Cruise, the charity. They had somebody wonderful for me, really, really powerful, using the Cruise charity, which was lovely. Journaling is very powerful as well. Just a notepad and a pen to get all those thoughts and those emotions out of your head, out of your body, getting them down on paper, and then asking yourself, what can I do about this? Or, you know, sometimes it's just blurging it all out, purging all out onto paper, getting it out of your system and onto the page. It can be profound, actually, and looking at it, reading it back in black and white, so you can really see how you're feeling. Give yourself permission to do things that lift you up, and don't feel guilty. Not always easy, I know. I think of my aunt, where her husband, my uncle, suddenly died in his late 50s. She felt guilty doing things for herself, but hey, you're here for yourself too. Celebrate your life. And with that, I remember, I think it was about a year later, I wasn't in a good place, and I ended up going for reflexology down the road. And I'd always said that when Neil passes, I want to go traveling, and there were places I wanted to go. And after she'd finished massaging my feet, she held them. I didn't realize that she was intuitive, and she said, I feel like you're stuck. And I burst out laughing. I told her I'd been a carer for years, and I said, isn't that funny? I said, I felt like I was a caged bird, really, whilst caring for Neil. But now he's gone, that cage door is open, but I'm just still hovering inside. She said, yes, you must go traveling, and you must go now. And I found it really funny. I just laughed. I said, and it was like she was the one who gave me permission. I wouldn't give myself permission. So if you're wondering, or let me be your that little person on your shoulder saying, yes, I give you permission. Go and do whatever it is that you need to lift yourself up. And with that, within that week, I booked my trip to Cambodia and to Vietnam. I wanted to head over to that neck of the woods, and I found it quite stressful going, actually, because it's not something I normally do, but I absolutely loved it. And it's so what I needed to do. It just got me out of the house and got me somewhere else. So very fortunate. Remember to give yourself time, and you've been through so much, and give yourself permission to have joy in your life. And that's me in Cambodia. I'm not sure what I'm eating, God knows, with my two new friends when I was out there, Christina and Karen, and have plans to look forward to. It could be something really small, just going seeing a friend that you've not seen for a long time and popping over there for a weekend. Celebrate all that you've done. You know, you've done a lot. So just take stock and do something really lovely for you.